Welcome to the Declaration of Independence class by the Grumpy Old Vet. This is class number 9 in this series and covers the founding document that lays out the principles that will later be specifically codified into law in the Constitution. The body of this document brings a list of 27 grievances to the king, not unlike the Grand Remonstrance of 1641. With that, let's move out. Welcome to the Declaration of Independence class, brought to you by the Hillsdale Justice Project at Liberty Hall, narrated by John Rutan. In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous Declaration of the 13 United States of America, an overview. Before the Declaration of Independence, even after the initial battles in the Revolutionary War broke out, few colonists desired complete independence from Great Britain, and those who did like John Adams were considered radical. Things changed over the course of the next year, however, as Britain attempted to crush the rebels with all the force of its great army. In his message to Parliament in October 1775, King George III railed against the rebellious colonies and ordered the enlargement of the Royal Army and Navy. News of his words reached America in January 1776, strengthening the radicals' cause and leading many conservatives to abandon their hopes of reconciliation. That same month, the recent British immigrant Thomas Paine published Common Sense, in which he argued that independence was a natural right and the only possible course for the colonies. The pamphlet sold more than 150,000 copies in its first few weeks in publication. In March 1776, North Carolina's Revolutionary Convention became the first to vote in favor of independence. 7 other colonies had followed suit by mid-May. On June 7th, the Virginia delegate Richard Henry Lee introduced a motion calling for the colony's independence before the Continental Congress when it met at the Pennsylvania State House, later Independence Hall, in Philadelphia. Amid heated debate, Congress postponed the vote on Lee's resolution and called a recess for several weeks. Before departing, however, the delegates also appointed a 5-man committee, including Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, and Robert R. Livingston of New York, to draft a formal statement justifying the break with Great Britain. That document would become known as the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson drafts the Declaration of the Independence. Jefferson had earned a reputation as an eloquent voice for the patriotic cause after his 1774 publication of A Summary View of the Rights of British America, and he was given the task of producing a draft of what would become the Declaration of Independence. As he wrote in 1823, the other members of the committee unanimously pressed on myself alone to undertake the draft. I consented. I drew it, but before I reported it to the committee, I communicated it separately to Dr. Franklin and Mr. Adams, requesting their corrections. I then wrote a fair copy, reported it to the committee, and from them, unaltered to the Congress. As Jefferson drafted it, the Declaration of Independence was divided into 5 sections, including an introduction, a preamble, a body, divided into 2 sections, and a conclusion. In general terms, the introduction effectively stated that seeking independence from Britain had become necessary for the colonies, while the body of the document outlined a list of grievances against the British Crown. The preamble includes its most famous passage. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. The vote for independence. The Continental Congress reconvened on July 1st, and the following day, 12 of the 13 colonies adopted Lee's resolution for independence. The process of consideration and revision of Jefferson's declaration, including Adams and Franklin's corrections, continued on July 3rd and into the late morning of July 4th, during which Congress deleted and revised some 1/5 of its text. The delegates made no changes to that key preamble, however, and the basic document remained Jefferson's words. Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence later on July 4th, though most historians now accept that the document was not signed until August 2nd. As the first formal statement by a nation's people asserting their right to choose their own government, the Declaration of Independence became a significant landmark in the history of liberty. In addition to its importance in the fate of the fledgling American nation, it also exerted a tremendous influence outside the United States, most memorably in France during the French Revolution. Together with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence can be counted as one of the three essential founding documents of the United States government. Introduction. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. When a group of people find it necessary to separate from another and take their place as an independent nation among other nations, as it is ordained by the Creator of the universe, they should respectfully explain the reasons for their decision to the world. Preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. We believe these truths are obvious. All people are equal, and they are given certain rights by their Creator that cannot be taken away. These rights include life, liberty, and property. To protect these rights, governments are created by the people, and they only have power because the people allow it. If a government becomes harmful to these rights, the people have the right to change or remove it and create a new government based on principles that will best ensure their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. It's wise not to change governments for small or temporary reasons. People are generally more willing to endure suffering when they can tolerate it, rather than change what they've always known. But when a government repeatedly abuses its power with the intent to impose total control, the people have both the right and duty to overthrow it and create a new government that will protect their future security. This has been the experience of the colonies, and it's now necessary for them to change their government. The actions of the current King of Great Britain show a pattern of repeated abuses aimed at establishing complete tyranny over the states. Let's look at the facts to prove this. Body. Part 1. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. The king has refused to approve laws that are important and necessary for the public's well-being. He has prevented his governors from passing urgent laws unless they are delayed until he gives his approval, and even then, he has ignored them. He has refused to pass laws that would help large groups of people unless they give up their right to have representatives in the legislature, a right that is invaluable to the people and only feared by tyrants. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. The king has forced legislative bodies to meet in places that are inconvenient, uncomfortable, and far from where the public records are kept, just to wear them down and make them agree with his decisions. He has repeatedly dissolved representative assemblies when they strongly opposed his violations of people's rights. After dissolving these assemblies, he has delayed holding new elections for a long time, leaving the legislative powers to the people themselves. During this time, the state has been vulnerable to outside attacks and internal chaos. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. The king has tried to stop the population of these states from growing by blocking laws that would allow foreigners to become citizens, refusing to pass laws that would encourage immigration, and raising the conditions for new land grants. He has interfered with the justice system by refusing to approve laws that would establish judicial powers. He has made judges dependent on his decisions, controlling their job security and the amount of money they are paid. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us, in times of peace, standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws. Giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, the king has created many new offices and sent numerous officers to harass our people and take away their resources. He has kept a standing army in times of peace without the approval of our lawmakers. He has tried to make the military independent of and more powerful than civilian government. He has worked with others to place us under foreign rule, which is not recognized by our laws or Constitution, and has approved their actions as if they were legitimate laws. Body, Part 2. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them, by a mock trial, from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent. The king has forced large groups of armed soldiers to live among us. He has protected them from punishment for killing our people by giving them fake trials. He has stopped us from trading with other parts of the world. He has imposed taxes on us without our agreement, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. The king has denied us the right to have trials by jury in many cases. He has sent us overseas to be tried for made-up crimes. He has taken away the fair English legal system in a nearby region, replacing it with a harsh government, and expanding its borders to use it as a model to impose similar rule over our colonies. He has taken away our charters, canceled important laws, and fundamentally changed how our governments work, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. The king has suspended our local legislatures and claimed the right to make laws for us in every situation. He has abandoned his role as our leader by taking away his protection and declaring war against us. He has looted our seas, destroyed our coastlines, burned our towns, and harmed our people. He is now bringing in foreign soldiers to complete the destruction and cruelty already started, actions so ruthless and deceitful that they are almost unmatched even in the most barbaric times, and totally unfit for the leader of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. The king has forced our fellow citizens who were captured at sea to fight against their own country, making them choose between killing their friends and family or being killed by them. He has stirred up rebellions within our own people and tried to bring hostile Native American groups into the conflict, whose way of fighting is to indiscriminately destroy everyone, regardless of age, gender, or status. Conclusion: in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. At every point of these injustices, we have humbly asked for help and solutions. But instead of addressing our concerns, our requests have been met with more harm. A ruler who consistently acts like a tyrant, showing no regard for our rights, is unfit to govern a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace friends. We have not ignored our British brothers. We have repeatedly warned them about their government trying to extend unjust control over us. We have reminded them of how we came here, settled, and built our lives. We have appealed to their sense of fairness and nobility and asked them, as fellow people, to reject these wrongful actions that threaten our relationship. But they have ignored our calls for justice and family ties. So we must accept that separation is necessary, and from now on, consider them enemies in war, but friends in peace. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. We, the representatives of the United States of America, gathered in Congress, appeal to the Supreme Judge to affirm the rightness of our intentions. In the name of the people of these colonies, we declare that these colonies are, and rightfully should be, free and independent states. They are no longer loyal to the British Crown, and all political ties between them and Great Britain are completely broken. As free and independent states, they have the full authority to wage war, make peace, form alliances, trade, and take all other actions that independent states can do. To support this declaration, and trusting in divine protection, we pledge our lives, fortunes, and honor to each other. Summary of grievances. The grievances in the Declaration of Independence focus on the tyranny and abuses of King George III. Here's a summary of the key grievances, alongside a comparison with the British Bill of Rights of 1689, highlighting the principles the colonists felt were being violated. 1. Refusal to assent to laws. The king refused to approve laws necessary for the public good. 2. Interference with legislation. He obstructed laws and delayed legislation that was in the public's interest. 3. Imposing taxes without consent. The king imposed taxes without the consent of the governed, violating the principle of no taxation without representation. 4. Quartering of troops. He forced colonists to house British soldiers, even during peacetime. 5. Suspension of colonial legislatures. The king dissolved colonial governments and prevented others from being elected. 6. Unjust trials. Colonists were sent to be tried in Britain, denying them trial by jury and violating their legal rights. 7. Military control over civil power. The king made the military superior to civil authority, undermining local governance. 8. Disbanding of local control. He removed the ability of local governments to function properly, undermining the colonists' self-governance. 9. Waging war against the colonies. The king declared war on the colonies and employed foreign mercenaries to enforce British rule. British Bill of Rights of 1689. The British Bill of Rights was a key document that outlined the rights of citizens and limits on the monarchy's power. It was created after the Glorious Revolution and reinforced the sovereignty of Parliament over the monarchy. Below are the key provisions and how the grievances of the Declaration of Independence relate to them. 1. No royal interference in law, Bill of Rights. The monarch cannot suspend or execute laws without Parliament's approval. Grievance. King George III suspended colonial legislatures and refused to approve necessary laws, which directly violated the Bill of Rights requirement for the king to work with Parliament, or in this case, the colonial assemblies. 2. No taxation without representation. Bill of Rights. The monarch could not levy taxes or raise an army without Parliament's consent. Grievance. King George III imposed taxes on the colonies without their consent, directly violating this principle. 3. Quartering of troops. Bill of Rights. The monarch cannot force citizens to house soldiers in their homes. Grievance. The colonists were forced to house British soldiers during peacetime, which violated this principle. 4. Free elections and parliamentary powers. Bill of Rights. The monarch cannot dissolve or interfere with elections or the rights of Parliament. Grievance. King George repeatedly dissolved colonial governments, preventing free and fair elections, violating this key principle. 5. Right to petition, Bill of Rights. The right to petition the monarch is guaranteed. Grievance. The colonists petitioned for redress of grievances, but their petitions were ignored or met with further injury, violating the right to petition for grievances. 6. Right to a fair trial. Bill of Rights. Trials must be by jury, and citizens should not be subjected to unfair trials. Grievance. Colonists were denied trial by jury and were sent overseas for trials, violating this principle. 7. No standing army without parliamentary approval. Bill of Rights. The monarch cannot maintain a standing army in peacetime without Parliament's approval. Grievance. King George III kept a standing army in the colonies without consent, violating this principle. 8. No cruel and unusual punishment. Bill of Rights. No cruel or unusual punishment should be inflicted. Grievance. King George's actions, such as sending mercenaries to fight the colonists and using excessive force, were seen as acts of cruelty that violated this principle. Conclusion. The colonists, in the Declaration of Independence, accused King George III of violating fundamental rights that were outlined in the British Bill of Rights of 1689. They believed that the king was not respecting their rights as Englishmen, especially their rights to self-government, fair trials, and protection from oppressive rule. Their grievances were a response to the king's repeated violations of these principles, which they felt justified their separation from Great Britain. That concludes the 9th class in this series on the Declaration of Independence. I hope you found this information to be helpful and entertaining. I will see you in Class 10, where we will go over Thomas Paine's essay, The American Crisis, published on December 23, 1776. Fall out.